weekend out here, and so hoping to get a bit more time outside later on.
Perfect. I'm guessing the weather is cooperating as well.
It is. It is. This is actually our last day to swim in our pool as well. So we already got in. It's maybe a little bit too cold, but we're trying to enjoy it one last day.
Yeah. So I'm sending you very, very good weather so you can have more than just
Thank
the
you.
one day for the pool.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I know today you're joining us to speak about a number of things, and as we shared, we're tying in the behaviors sometimes that we get stuck doing that we don't like, but of course, from a perspective of what are we doing
hmm
about it or what are we doing to cause it. So before we jump right into that, Laura, do me a favor, please introduce yourself to my audience a little bit about who you are and of course where they can find you.
Yes. So my name is Laura, and I am a BFRB and habit coach. BFRB stands for body focused repetitive behaviors. That's frustrating behaviors like hair pulling, skin picking, nail biting, and the like. And I'm also a physician assistant in psychiatry. So kind of wearing two different hats there with overlapping roles. People can find me at hopeandhealingcoach.com. That's my website. There's plenty of information there about looking at our unwanted habits in a very different light from probably what you're used to. And even though I mentioned BFRBs, this applies to any habits, whether it is compulsive scrolling or stress eating or angry outbursts. It doesn't even matter what the habit is. If it's something that you're saying, why can't I stop doing this? These strategies apply to that.
Perfect. So I guess my first question is how did you get involved in this type of work when it comes to unwanted behaviors and why?
So I have trichotillomania, which is compulsive hair pulling. And this started when I was about 12 years old. And I spent 20 years not telling a single person about it because I had so much shame. People knew that I had bald spots, but I said it was from this medical condition. And I couldn't admit that I was doing this to myself. And I also didn't understand why I couldn't stop doing it. So finally, after about 20 years, I started opening up about it, which helped me learn more about it and start decreasing that shame because a lot of that shame comes from us holding that in and not telling anyone. And shame is just toxic to ourselves. And so started opening up and looking for strategies. And what I found was a lot of the experts out there were teaching strategies for how to deal with the urges, but I kept thinking there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a way to decrease the urges. Even some of the experts that I talked to who also had BFRBs themselves were still doing their behavior. And there was even this discussion sometimes about, I know what to do and, I'm teaching clients how to do this and I'm still struggling to do it myself. So I just kept thinking we have to be missing something. It can't be that so many experts out there are still struggling with this, even with all these tools. And so, in that, finally, I came to the realization that all of these behaviors, whether it was the hair pulling or something else, it's all related to dysregulation. When we get dysregulated, when we get out of balance, our brain starts to choose for us how we're going to regulate. And it usually ends up being things that we don't like. And so once I realized that it was related to dysregulation, then that gave me the power to start regulating myself and work on things from the bottom up. And that's when I really noticed these urges rather than like shouting at me, they became more whisperers. And I was able to listen to them and lean in and say, okay, what do I need right now? How am I out of balance? How is this behavior trying to help me? So that's how I got into this is basically this 30-year journey of my own with hair pulling. And then along that road, I realized that this applies to any unwanted behavior, that it's not just hair pulling, it's anything.
I think that's the first time I've come in contact or had a conversation with someone who is experiencing hair pulling, where it's a behavior that they go through. And you shared something that really got me thinking when you mentioned why you got into it and how it's impacting your life. How did you begin to realize the different impacts that it had in your personal life and for from your perspective as well?
Yeah, the impacts are just tremendous. That shame that I carried with me about the hair pulling, it was such a heavy weight. It kept me from feeling like I fit in. I remember pictures of me in high school with my hair looking different, and people would ask me like, "Oh, why is your ponytail so thin?" Or I would look back and in these pictures, like my hair's all lopsided because I had more hair on one side than the other. And so it really kept me small because I thought there must be something wrong with me that I can't control this. I remember even the very first friend that I told about this. I remember after telling her that I was pulling my hair out, I asked, "Do you think I'm crazy?" Because I really didn't know for myself. Like, am I crazy? I can't stop doing this thing that I desperately want to stop. So I think the biggest impact that it had on me was the tremendous amount of shame, and that kept me very, very small.
And shame for a lot of people keep them isolated because it's something that you're feeling all the time. How were you able
Yes.
to maybe work through it and manage the emotions that came with you, that came about because of the shame?
Yeah, I had a really helpful therapist around the time when I was starting to come out about this. And he really helped me ask myself some hard questions. At the time I was in a relationship that really wasn't healthy for me, and I was really just pushing myself to keep on going and ignore my boundaries and my limitations. And so it was really helpful for him. I mean, it's helpful for me to have him pose these questions where I really had to stop and ask myself and think, okay, that doesn't make sense. If I'm saying this, but I'm doing this, that doesn't add up. And so it was really getting curious that helped me through it. Once I started getting curious and realized that the shame was telling me one thing, this behavior was telling me this other thing, but that wasn't really who I am. There was more to who I was. Then that started this new path for me to be able to see things differently and open up to other people. And I think that opening up to other people was absolutely by far the best thing that I could have done for the shame, because shame just thrives in isolation. And once we start opening up and we realize that people don't reject us for these things that we think are just terrible parts of ourselves, then we have to start asking ourselves, well, maybe I am more than just this behavior, or maybe I am worthy of this friendship, even if I have this hair pulling or whatever else it is.
I remember someone sharing a story with me where they were experiencing shame and it was keeping them from, it was preventing them from finding the type of peace and happiness that they wanted. And this impacted their job, it impacted their family, and impacted the relationships, well, at least the romantic relationships that they were engaging in. And the source of their shame was that they felt they weren't good enough because of their past,
Mm,
right? They did some things
mhm,
that were maybe not the best. And they're like, okay, I have, let's say, for example, the person has children because of it,
mm,
right? And when she shared this, what came out ultimately, Laura, was she wanted to do better, but she didn't think she was worthy of a better identity of herself,
mhm.
right? When you look back, and even the people you deal with, do they struggle with seeing, sorry, not necessarily seeing, but accepting that there's a different version of themselves? It might be scary, but they are worthy of the change.
That's a really common thing that I see in clients, this fear of what if I'm not worthy of something better than this? And so that is something that really holds people back. Um, and it can be tough to overcome. A lot of times people think that if they move forward in life, if they grow, if they do something that shows that they are worthy, then they haven't atoned enough for whatever the, quote unquote bad stuff is that they have done, right? They worry that they are opening themselves up to repeat the same behaviors. And so helping people work through that to say, okay, that was a younger version of yourself. And it's not fair for you to have the information that you have now and expect that past version of you to make decisions based on the current information that you had. We're always doing the best we can with the tools we have, always, 100% of the time. When we make poor choices, it's not because we're a bad person, it's because we didn't have the tools or support or resources that we needed to make better choices. And so trying to help people understand that, I think, is can help move the needle when we realize that we're always doing the best we can with the tools we have. And sometimes poor choices are the result of not having enough tools, but it's not a character flaw.
What do you then think are some of the obstacles that prevent people from identifying that it doesn't define them, it's not a character flaw, it's just something that maybe they have to work through and it's a moment in time versus a defining moment for them?
I think that childhood trauma or even just a chaotic childhood, or or any upbringing where you didn't get those messages, is one of the biggest barriers that gets in the way, because we end up with these ingrained beliefs in ourselves because of the way that things happened when we were younger. And so I think moving past that, sometimes that involves, you know, kind of rewiring the way we think. Sometimes that involves going back to our past and looking at, okay, where did I pick up this belief? And now that I know where I picked up this belief, usually people can say, oh, yeah, that person in my life that I picked this belief up wasn't helpful for me. They weren't healthy for me. And that can help people let it go when they realize they're carrying that load. But I think that having that type of upbringing or that type of history is one of the biggest barriers that get in the way of people believing that they are worthy of change, or that they need to be punished, or have some other long-standing consequence because of choices that they've made.
It's like the parents who tell the child that they're stupid and they grow up to thinking that they're stupid and then they perform,
Absolutely.
right?
100%. Yes, we believe what people tell us when we're young, and then when later on when we grow up, we believe what we tell ourselves. And so if someone has always told you that you're not enough in some way, or sometimes it's not even that someone has told you directly, sometimes it's just implied and we pick up those messages. Sometimes I talk to clients who say, "Well, nobody ever said that to me." Nobody ever said it to you, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't implied, that that message wasn't out there. And so we have to look at that as well. But yes, absolutely. When we're told those things, we absorb that in, and then we believe it. And it's hard to break out of that mold that we have kind of been given.
I look at like children, adults. I shouldn't say I look at children. I look at like adults, right, who had a difficult childhood
Mhm.
and they wanted something so badly, right? Look at like the five loving edge. I just wanted my parents to tell me I'm doing a good job, words of affirmation. I want to receive meaningful gifts, right? Not just on my birthday and Christmas twice a year. I wanted,
Mhm.
acknowledgement. I wanted quality time. And then I look at those adults who didn't have that growing up. And then they go out there and they seek it in like the most destructive and toxic places,
Yeah.
right? Like you have the person who didn't hear that they're good enough, they go out there and as soon as someone says that they're good enough, let's say from a male perspective, they have the gangs, they have the violence, right? They
Mhm.
have because they have the older crowd. And then if you look at, let's say, from a woman's perspective, and I'm only using this just because they're a little bit more prone, just like how men are a little bit more prone to violence. Um, they'll go out there, they'll have toxic boyfriends, toxic relationships, promiscuous situations, right? And sometimes people forget how impactful your childhood can be on your behaviors as your adulthood. What do you think is maybe preventing people from making that connection and identifying that, hey, a lot of your problems is because they're unresolved from your childhood and we need to work on that?
I think one of the things that might get in the way of that, two things come to mind. Number one is the just lack of awareness. Some people just don't realize that is a traumatic experience. I can't tell you how many times I talk to somebody for the first time and I'm getting a picture of what's going on, and I ask them about a history of trauma and they say, nope, no history of trauma or abuse. And then as we're talking, I realize that their parents divorced when they were 10 years old and it was a really nasty divorce and the parents fought a lot. And then in high school, they were with this toxic partner who was always mean and nasty to them, and so on and so on. And sometimes I get to the end of that first discussion and I say, I let them know, like, hey, in the beginning, you said no history of trauma or abuse, but I just want to point out that these other things that you talked about, those count. That's an example of how I think sometimes it's just awareness. People don't know. People have often been told that it's okay by other people in their lives. That's okay that that person did that, or blamed the person for staying in that relationship or whatever. So I think that awareness is some of it. Um, the other thing that gets in the way, and apologies, I just like totally lost my train of thought for what that second thing was. So hopefully it'll come back to me. But definitely lack of awareness, I think, is a huge one.
I agree. I think if people were, I think a part of the, when you mention lack of awareness, I think something that impacts awareness is that there's like the defense mechanism that, well, I don't necessarily want to talk about it because either it's in the closet, like, that dirty sock that's in the closet,
Mhm.
you smell it, you know it's there. right? But we're
Yeah.
just gonna pretend like no one knows
Yes.
that odor is
Yes.
just
Yes.
putrid in the air, right?
Yes.
And then you look at someone that may say that, well, it made me stronger. And then I remember someone shared that, and I asked them a question. I was like, stronger in what way? Right? And they're like,
Mm,
well, I went through it. I was like, okay, but how did it make you stronger? Like, if I were to take away that traumatic experience,
mm,
are you the same person?
mhm.
Right? Maybe you are,
Yeah.
maybe you aren't, right? Right? I can understand perseverance where you went through a difficult moment and you learned something from it. But I think sometimes for so many people, pointing the finger at your parents is so
Mm,
taboo.
mhm,
And I think something that's even more taboo is pointing the fingers at yourself,
mhm,
right? Saying that it's not the world against me, it's my childhood trauma and my mistakes.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Is there a disconnect, or in your opinion, is there maybe a disconnect between people accepting their role in the what's the word I'm trying to be politically correct. Their role in some of the issues that they may be experiencing in their adult life.
Yeah. Well, let me for a second just what you said totally reminded me of that second point that I was going to make. So let me kind of walk back there for a minute. The other thing that I see is that sometimes people just want to look forward. Sometimes part of what gets in the way of them really acknowledging how their upbringing plays a role is that they say, That's in the past. I just want to leave it in the past. Can't we just move forward?" And so we can, but we don't heal from trauma until we experience those emotions related to trauma. So if you haven't healed from those things, then we do have to walk it back and address those things and feel those feelings. That's another thing that I think gets in the way. And then the next question that you said, and sorry, can you go ahead and repeat it again? So,
Absolutely. So what do you think is the disconnection that's preventing people from identifying their role in some of the issues that they have in their life as adults?
yeah, I think that a lot of that can be it's hard to look at ourselves and admit that there's something that we can change. When we take on the victim role and say like, "Oh, it's their fault," or "It's my situation's fault," or I'm a victim of these circumstances." What we do is we free ourselves from the responsibility to do something about it. And so there's a bit of protection in there. It's certainly not protection that we want to stay under long term, but in the short term, when we don't have the resources or we don't have the support or whatever it is, it may serve us to say, I can't do anything about it. It's not my fault. Again, that's not helpful long term. That might help us in the very short term while we can get our bearings and figure things out and think about it more logically. But I think that something that gets in the way is when we start to admit that we have power to control something, well, now we've given ourselves the responsibility to do something about it. And sometimes we're ready for that challenge and sometimes we're not.
There's someone that I used to be on social media. Can you call people your friends? Followers on social media, right? And we used to like talk in DMs and things like that. And her marriage wasn't as healthy as she wanted it to be. So what she would start doing, she would start having weekend getaways. And me being naive, I was like, "What's a weekend getaway?" And she's like, "Oh, that's when I go and I have sexual relations with other people who aren't my husband." So I was like, "Oh, okay. I learned something do every day, right?" So she would do this, and I asked her after a while. She was sharing this information because she doesn't really know me, so I'm wondering how many people knows about this, right? I asked her, and she's like, "Well, my marriage isn't going where I'm going, so this is what I'm doing." So I was like, "But you do see that eventually your marriage is going to end. Eventually, you're going to have to go through your role in this." And I said that now, when you get into a future relationship, this is going to come up because someone's going to ask you, why did your marriage not fail? And they're going to ask you your role in it. And she was in total denial because she didn't want to consider it,
Mhm.
right? She was so in the moment. Could that be another aspect where maybe some people are so in the moment, they don't see the impact of their actions tomorrow, a week from now, or even a year from now?
Absolutely. And that tends to be another situation where people don't feel that they have the tools to navigate the bigger situation around them in that situation that you described. I imagine that she probably didn't feel that she had the tools to either discuss that the marriage wasn't going well with her husband, or that she didn't feel that she had the tools to leave the marriage if that seemed like what was best for her. And so sometimes if we think we either aren't strong enough to make a decision, or we don't have the resources to change, or whatever it is, we can't get ourselves out of this situation that we know is not good for us, then we can turn to other things like weekend getaways to give ourselves an escape essentially from the stuff that we don't want to look at because we don't know how to change it.
It seems like it's easier to escape temporarily, like for an hour, two
Absolutely.
hours, than for like
Yes.
forever, right?
Because it
I
catches up
wonder,
with you. So you can
yeah,
only
to
get
your
away for so
point.
long before it catches up with you. And you need to make those bigger changes to get out of those situations more long term.
I wonder then sometimes is it that they know that there's changes they have to make? So
I
because
think
it's
so.
easier to be the same and complain,
Yep, absolutely.
that's easier, right?
It is in the short term, at least. Maybe not the long term, but in the short term, yes.
I see so many people who get very comfortable in the victim mentality, right? It's me. And I remember someone shared an example where it's like a jacket that you wear, right?
Mm.
And instead of you having patches of, let's say, designs, floral pattern, it's all your behaviors that you don't like, right? It's like your traumas are here, your pain is here, but it isn't anything that you ever contributed. I remember in my 20s, I was going through a very difficult time because I didn't think I was going to be successful. And for me, I felt that I would have failed not only as a person, but as a man, right? Because I was like, I want a family. How am I going to be able to support if I feel like I'm not capable? Where I stood in front of the mirror and I probably had one of the most difficult conversations I've ever had with my life. I said, okay, these are the things that I like. These are the things that I don't like. These are the things that are within my control. Terrain, what is it that you want to do about it? And I remember that question being something that I ask myself so often is terrain, what is it that you want to do about it? When you're working with clients or even yourself, what are maybe some of the common practices that you help them along to self-identify and to move forward?
Well, you mentioned one of the things, and that is control. So often people lose sight of what they do have control over and what they don't have control over, and they can get stuck in these things that they don't have control over. And, as we talked about, like complaining, right? And complain that it's not different over and over again. And so some of it is breaking it down into let's figure out what you can control and what you can't control. The stuff that you can't control, we're just going to have to leave that and focus on the things that you can control. And so some of it is that looking at what can you control. And you also said, terrain, what do you want to do about it, right? And so a lot of a very similar question that I ask clients often as it relates to behaviors is how do you want to be coping? This behavior is a coping strategy. It's a regulation tool. It's just trying to help you get by. If you don't like it, how do you want to be coping? And if you don't know the answer to that, that's probably why you're stuck with this behavior because you don't have an idea of what you want to be doing to release tension or balance yourself or live a balanced lifestyle. And so a lot of the work that I do is helping people increase awareness related to their behavior and discover what it's trying to do for them, how it's trying to help them. And then we look at how do we get your needs met? Because if your needs aren't met, this behavior is just going to keep creeping in. And it takes energy to change behavior. So we also need to make sure we have all of those basic needs met before we have the additional energy that it takes to change behaviors. And then also, I help them build a toolbox of regulation strategies because stuff's going to happen in life. We can't expect things to not be stressful. That's just unrealistic. So if we can acknowledge that stressful things are going to happen, let's prepare in advance. Let's figure out when you've had a bad day or when you have an argument with somebody who is close to you or when you have something at work that's disappointing. How do you want to nurture and comfort yourself and move through that disappointment? So that's a lot of the work that I do with clients and how I help them get to the other side of where these behaviors are not running their lives and having such an incredible impact.
Could someone then get stuck in a specific behavior because it is comfortable to them and leaving it can be difficult because it's uncharted waters?
Absolutely, 100%. And so often we get this we have this idea of what our identity is, and it's so uncomfortable to step out of that even if we know that what we're doing right now isn't working for us. That uncharted territory can be so difficult and so scary. And so, yes, I see a lot of times that people have almost given up. They're like, well, this is the way it's always been, right? This is the way I've always done things. And so I often say to them, it's the way that you've always done things. That doesn't mean that it's the way that you have to keep doing them. As soon as you recognize that this is something that isn't working out for you, that's your opportunity to decide, do I want to do things differently? Do I want to challenge this? And sometimes I talk to people who really are resistant and we really do end up at, well, it sounds like at this point in your life, this behavior is working out enough for you. If you've looked at all of the other options for what giving up this behavior looks like, and all of those feel too scary, then maybe this is where we stay. And sometimes even that acceptance helps people turn things around and say, like, well, I don't want to stay here. And you're like, well, okay, then we've got to do some of those other things. So sometimes even laying it out like that, right? Saying, okay, you're scared of this and you're scared of this and you're scared of this, maybe we just stay here. And then people are like, no, but I don't want to. And that can help give them a bit of motivation to move past that fear of that uncharted territory.
I spoke to someone today in what you just shared, and they were suffering a little bit of identity crisis because they're trying to figure out who they were going to be because the person that they are today is not helping them reach the goals that they have for themselves, whether it's friendship, work, or romantic. And one thing that he shared was that he was having a difficult time moving away from the friends because he identified certain behaviors within the friends group that is
Mhm.
holding him back. And when I spoke to him about it, it was determined that, well, if I don't have them as my friends, I'm not going to have any friends. I'm going to be alone.
Mm.
How impactful is that fear or just a feeling of loneliness when you're making these changes, as you mentioned?
Oh, I think that's huge. And keep in mind that loneliness is really scary to our brain. If we rewind thousands of years ago, being alone could have been the difference between life and death, right? When we were in tribes, then being around people, having that community was truly a protective factor, a really important one. And so I think it's important to recognize that loneliness and being alone isn't just this kind of small thing that we sometimes make really big. It truly is ingrained in our brains that we need other people. And so if in that case they weren't seeing the option of getting new friends and new, acquaintances and people to meet and be around and get support from, if that hadn't even crossed their mind, then yes, being alone sounds really scary. It feels like you're just walking out into the wilderness and you don't know what's going to happen. And in those cases, we have to look at, okay, well, that's the thing that we're afraid of. But how do I get that need met in another way? Because the way that I'm getting the need met right now really isn't working out for me. How do I get it met in another way that could work out for me better and align with my values and goals?
Sometimes I look at it and I wonder, to your point, it's so hardwired in so many of us that because we're social beings, right? Like we want to be around people, we want to have that interaction. And then you mentioned it earlier, and we talked about it earlier, where it comes to worthiness. And sometimes you're like, okay, these friends that I have, although they're not helping me towards my goal, I'm good enough for
Hmm.
them,
Yes.
right? But maybe those who have achieved the goals in life, maybe I won't be good enough to even be around them. So now you're in that middle. You don't want what you're leaving, but you feel like you can't be around what you're trying to achieve. Like that sounds
Mhm.
like a difficult place for anyone to be in.
It is, and I think we have to be fed up enough with our current circumstances to take that leap of faith. And when you described that, what it made me think of was when my first marriage was coming to an end, I remember my now ex-husband said, "You think someone else is going to put up with your crap?" And I remember thinking to myself, I don't know, but I can't stay here. I know that this isn't sustainable. So I don't know if I'm gonna find anybody else, but I have to take that chance. And so that's what came to mind, this idea of we have to be fed up enough with our current circumstances or situation to take a leap of faith that we can maybe get it worked out because there's no guarantees that we can get it worked out. It has to be a bit of